I think when we finally accept ultimate responsibility for where we are and we stop blaming externally, I think we gain all of the power to change it.
This is the Own It Show, where we tell stories of how everyday people made ownership theirs.
Hey, everybody, welcome back to the Own It Show. I'm your host, Justin.
And I'm Alyse. Welcome to the show.
And if you've been following for the last few weeks, we've had a lot of different people come into our purview and expose you guys to a lot of different just experiences that we can really lean into. We've gone through how to lean into business and relationship in a strong way, how to focus on yourself and relationship in a strong way, even when things aren't going appropriately. And today we're bringing on a guest that not only embodies what it means to be a great father, a great husband, a great entrepreneur, a great man of God, but also somebody who has been able to encapsulate it all together and ultimately has realized the fruit that comes into your life because of that. Not only has he been able to build the fourth fastest growing privately held company in America in 2019 on the Inc. 5000 list, but he and his wife have been able to raise an amazing family and really live life according to their calling and their purpose. And so I cannot be more excited to introduce you guys to Brandon Poulin. And so Brandon, thank you so much for being with us.
Wow. Thanks, man. I got to live up to that one. I love it. I love great father, great husband. That's a good intro, man. I like that. I appreciate that.
You're just going to have to be here around everywhere and just say, hey, this is Brandon Poulin. He's a great father. He's a great husband. He's a great entrepreneur. Yes. You got to like him.
Let's go, man. I'm with that. Let's go.
So guys, I got introduced to Brandon through a mastermind that both he and I are part of in the Wellspring. And the first moment that I met Brandon, it was just an immediate connection. And there's certain things about people when you meet them that you just can't hide. Integrity, intelligence, intentions. And Brandon was just at another level, the way that he was able to do all of those things. And so when Alyse and I invited him onto the podcast, the biggest thing that I wanted you guys to realize is that you truly can have it all. It's not something that you have to compromise. It's not something that you have to choose one or the other. But when you are able to live in alignment with your purpose, in alignment with your mission, in alignment with your calling, in alignment with your faith, and having these priority trees structured according to what is true to you, everything seems to work. And it's not without trials. It's not without troubles. It's not without obstacles. But the way in which you solve those become really unique and amazing. And so, Brandon, I'd love for you to lean in a little bit on just your journey in entrepreneurship, because I know it didn't start with Lady Boss, and I know it also didn't, it's not ending there either. And so with that journey that you've been on of young Brandon kind of leaning into learn all of these traits, these intentionalities, living on purpose, living according to your calling. How did that transition and how did that learning curve work for you?
Yeah, it's been quite a learning curve. I was terrible at all of it when I started. I can tell you that much. And then you just suck less as time goes on, you know? But I remember being a kid in the backseat of my mom's car. I must have been like 4 or 5 years old, and we were going through the healthiest place ever, McDonald's drive-through. And I remember thinking like, okay, so we're gonna like pay money, and then they're gonna like give us the food, but then they had to like get the food, and so it wasn't like they just keep all the money. And so like I was having these thoughts at like a super young age, and I always just was fascinated by business and money and how value worked. And so that was like the first thought I remember having about entrepreneurship. And, you know, I'd watched my dad go through multiple different companies, and he was always like, had this energy, and he was always upbeat, and he was always just doing something and talking about something and selling something. Right. And so I always kind of knew that I was going to be down that path. And it really actually started because of all things, I really just wanted a motorcycle. Like I wanted a sexy sport bike And I don't know why I wanted it so bad. I think it was something about like maybe the adrenaline of it and the speed, and then like girls would like me, right? Like that was probably the driving force. And I remember calculating the amount of hours it was going to take me to work at my job at the time, which was Sunflower Market, right, a grocery store. And I was in the dairy section of the grocery store. And so I remember calculating the amount of hours it was going to take me. And it was a lot. And so I went to my manager after like 3 months, and I'd worked my tail off. I've never been someone who hasn't put in the effort. I've never been afraid to put in the effort and do my best. And so I asked him, and I was like, hey, I'm at 750. How about $8? I've been killing it. And he's like, you've been here 3 months. Come back to me in about 9 more months. And I was like, man, this is going to take a while. And I remember the next day I walked in there, and he completely chewed out this guy who had shown up late, or I don't even remember. It was something small, and just character assassinated him in front of everybody. And I was like, that's not going to be me next. Like, I'm out. And I walked out that day, and I remember thinking like, dang, like I just left. Like I invested a lot to get this job and put in work, but I don't, for some reason I was just like, there's more important things to me than being treated like that. And that was just like a really, talk about own it, right? Like that was my first experience of like really taking ownership of like, I'm not just going to be a victim to this. Right. And so that was like my first job. And then fast forward a little bit to my first company. And I remember my friend coming back from living in Phoenix. I was in Albuquerque at the time. And he came back and was like telling me about making all this money in auto glass, right? Like I'm at this car wash and we're doing windshields. And he was just going on and on and on and on. And I got so excited. I was like, okay. He's like, here, check this out. So it's this kit. He handed me this fanny pack. He's like, you can take this thing, spend 5 minutes and fix someone's windshield chip, right? And you can bill their insurance for like, I think it's $70, $90, something like that. And it literally takes 5 minutes and hardly costs you anything. And I was like, really? And so I filed my first LLC when I was 17, because I was like, I could do that. And we walked up to random people in a parking lot and we fixed their windshield in the parking lot for free just to do it. And I was like, I could do this. And so I'll never forget, this was my first moment of my first real sale. I walked into a gas station, and on the way to that gas station, I had my mom drive me. I was like, hey, we're going to go to lunch. Just stop by this gas station. Right. Because I knew that if she wasn't in the car with me, I would have totally chickened out. Right. I was like, hey, I got to make this stop. Right. And so I walk into this gas station, and I'm like a Middle Eastern guy behind the counter. Like I'm like the whitest white boy he's ever seen. Right. And I walk in like kid, 17 years old. And I was like, hey man, you have customers out here and people are coming through getting gas, and you could be the only gas station in town where they get their windshield cleaned. So I'm going to clean all your customers' windshields, and I'm going to pay you to do it. And then if they have like a chip, I'm going to fix it. And he's like, okay. And I was like, really? And so that was like my first, like my first vendor, my first client in business was that. So I hired a bunch of my friends, and we all started fixing chips. I had like 4 or 5 gas stations at the time. And I learned how to hustle, man. I learned how to get told no a lot, being like this random dude walking up to you while you're getting gas. Like that's where I started, man.
So, I mean, it's really an amazing story, because ultimately what it goes back to is you knowing your values so well that you weren't willing to compromise on them. You knew that you would never stoop to the level of the way that manager chewed that other person out, and you were like, I will absolutely not be a part of this. And then of course you went on the journey to really be able to figure out, what is next for me, and create this mini empire at the age of 17, which is also a really, really cool story. But I don't want to skip over the fact that it all stemmed from the fact that you knew your values so well. So can you dive into that a little bit more and talk about how your values along this journey has helped steer you and guide you in the right direction?
Yeah. I mean, I think the more, how do I say this? I think your value system, who you believe yourself to be, I think it's tested in entrepreneurship. I think it's tested in the way that once money comes into the equation and personal gain comes into the equation, you really learn who you are. And I think it just, you hear people say, oh, money makes you more of who you are. And I think that's true. I think it just amplifies who you are as a human being. But I think you learn a lot about your values when you're making decisions in your business, right? Like how you treat your employees, how you pay people, how you sell, how you represent. Because there's definitely ethical boundaries along the way that no one would ever know, but you're making these decisions about how you run your business. And so I think it's critical to have that North Star. One of my favorite questions to ask people when I interview is, where do your values come from?
Mm-hmm.
Right. And then you find out, like, you find out, is it like a religious kind of foundation, like their parents, and what values are important to you. Right. And I think it's a really interesting question, because when you're controlling resources and directing people, it's more important than ever that you have strong values, because your decisions have larger implications than the average person, right? As an entrepreneur.
100%. And the unique part is when you get really deeply aligned on your value system and your value sets, those quote unquote hard decisions that you have to make all of a sudden become really simple. And you no longer, if they are truly non-negotiables for you, if they are truly value systems, if they are truly deep-seated and something that means something to you far beyond just a word on the wall or something that you have written in a journal somewhere, they literally guide every decision that you have to make. And I love what you said, is your dollars and personal needs ultimately end up coming to the forefront when you're in entrepreneurship. As soon as that can start to be something that gets funded, or you can get further ahead and you get clouded by something worldly, it can change that value if it isn't truly a value. And it's something that is just simply there for showing on the surface. And so as you were creating your value system at a young age, at 17, it's probably far different than it is for you today.
A little bit.
Yeah. How has the experiences that you've been through, and I want to get into how Lady Boss was created and kind of the massive exit that you had, and the growth journey there, because it all stems back to this value system and how it ended up occurring. But when we come back to this, how did your value system change and adjust as you started to learn and get more experience as an entrepreneur in that space?
Man, it's so crazy. What comes to mind is the more money that I've made, the more I've realized the other areas of my life are more valuable. It's wild. And it's like,
dive into that
it's
for
easy.
a second. I unpack that for a second, because that's a really big statement. Mm-hmm. Is the more money that you've made, the more you've realized that every other facet of your life is more important or more valuable. Dive into that for a little bit.
Yeah. Well, the first thing that comes to mind is I remember being, shortly after that auto glass company, I joined a network marketing company, and that's where I got started in the health industry. And I had a lot of favor. I had a lot of great men. That's where I met my first mentor. And I finally got around people striving for more. And I latched onto it and sunk my teeth in it like nobody had. And I became very successful in that company at that time. For me, like being 19, making six figures, training people who were much older than I was, speaking in front of 600 people. People wanted to know my name. People got on a call with me every week. And my team, I had, 1,000 promoters in my organization. By anyone's standards or mine at the time, I was like, oh man, I'm successful. I got a car, I got a house. I'm 19. And I was the most empty at the peak of that season of my life, after getting all the things the world said that you should have. And so that was my first real moment of realization of like, the more successful I've been, the more the other values in my life became more valuable or more important, the other areas of life besides success. And then it's almost like success morphs into just a desire to grow more than anything and just see what you're made of. Right. I think that's what really drives me now is just leaning into potential. But when I talk about like, as I make more, other things become more important. It's just the more successful you are, it takes getting there to really realize and see like the $23.49 that we collected on the day we launched Lady Boss was better than the first $1 million month. Like it was the best money we ever made. Like her name was Yolanda. It was like 7:05 in the morning and it was the ding notification on my cell phone. Like that was a more exciting dollar amount than the first $5 million month we had. Right. Like, and that's what's so interesting about it. And people who hear it go, oh yeah, well you have money. So of course you can say that. But it's like, you don't really realize because everybody teaches that like, oh, you just need more. And the reality is no, like you can get more and you can lose everything else along the way. And then you get divorced and you lose half your net worth or you didn't take care of your family. And then like, no one's going to be on their deathbed. Like, man, I should have like worked one more hour. I should have spent less time with family, church, kids, health, like, you know what I mean? So I'm insane about growth and driving and making stuff happen and growing things, but not at the expense of everything else. Yeah. And I think if there's anything that right now in this very like season of my life that I'm passionate about, it's being in a position of financial freedom where you can live off the interest dividends of your investments and being in this place where everything that's being outputted online and social media and the biggest influencers is like to sacrifice your entire life at the altar of success. And that's what's being pushed. And I can't stand it. It drives me bonkers. Yeah. But it's also like yo-yoed with the fact that I'm a driver and I grew $200 million in revenue from a bootstrap business I built before I turned 30. Like that's also me. So it's like, how do you have it all? Like you said, and that there's not an easy answer to that question. That's for sure.
Yeah, there absolutely isn't. And, I just want to reiterate and reinforce something that you said that's so important that pretty much every person goes through or hopefully goes through at some point in their life is they realize they've been through this routine that the world tells you you're meant to go through, right? Where it's like, go to school, get good grades, go to college, get a good job, get married, have the 2.5 kids, the white picket fence, right? That's the recipe that essentially the world tells us we're meant to follow to achieve happiness. But most of the time when somebody gets there, they're like, wait, is that it? Now what? Right. And that's why people have these midlife crises and all of these divorce happens. And, there's so many different ways in which people respond to it. But, one of the things that we talk about often in Inner Energy is that it is our jobs as adults to understand why, to understand what feels out of alignment, to understand what might have happened to us in the past to make us believe that way, and to make us believe that and to make us continue to show up in whatever negative habits we've created over this lifetime. So, Brandon, I'm curious to hear from you, if from some of these entrepreneurs or listeners who might be struggling with something like this, what's a piece of advice you would give them, knowing that you're clearly somebody who's been through it and come out and on the other side with really clear values and really clear clarity on what the priorities of your life look like?
Yeah, that's a tough one. I know I could say it's not the same for everybody. I think we're all looking for some magic formula. Like at Lady Boss, we had fitness plus nutrition times accountability equals results, right? And like that's a formula. And like math is like very in a box, and you're like, okay, there's inputs and outputs. But I think from a standpoint of what you should do and how you should live. And I think it's totally different for everybody, right? The best definition I know is the biblical definition that I follow and attempt to follow. I would say I'm definitely not perfect. And so, that has a foundation for me that's allowed me to become the man that can handle the kind of stuff that I've been able to accomplish and not just melt down and lose it all and go crazy and off the wall like we see so many famous and highly successful people at young ages do. Right. But I don't think there's a one size of what?
The definition you said, it's a biblical definition that you follow to be the man.
Oh, just the structure of a great life, right? Putting God first, putting family second, and the biblical order of things, right? The seek first the kingdom of God and the rest will be added unto you, right? Like these are concepts that, if you're listening and you're not a believer or Christian, are very hard to wrap your head around. And so I think it's a very deep question to be like, well, how should I live my life? How far should I grow my company? How much time should I spend in these different areas? Mm-hmm. Right. I think that's part of the human experience we're all trying to figure out. And I think it varies in seasons, and I think that's part of the fun, and there isn't a perfect answer, but not subscribe. And this is where you have to be so careful what mentorship, what people that you follow and intake, because you better really like who they are and how they live as a whole. Because if you submit under the authority of somebody else, and I believe in that wholeheartedly, we all need to have authority. Like I signed up as someone who's been in the health industry for a decade with you guys. Justin is coaching me right now in my health, right? I submitted to his authority in my health because what I've been doing has been working for me, and all the things that his program does, I've never done before. And I was like, all right, I believe in his story, his results, and I submitted to that authority. And so in terms of my health, right? And so when I think about we're following people on social media, we're watching their content, we're watching their short 60-second clips, we're watching their life. We have to be very careful who we let speak into our lives, because we're submitting to their authority and who they are across the board. And so what I think is we have to be careful about who we give that permission to, because consciously or subconsciously, we will start to be like them. We'll start to talk like them, think like them, want the things they want. And that's where we have to be careful, right? Because I think everybody is in a different spot. You may be following someone who is in a completely different place in their life, maybe doesn't have children or does have children, maybe you see their business success, but their personal relationships are wrecked. And you don't really know people that you follow online. Right. And so what I'm passionate about right now, and is a thought for me too, is okay, I follow them, but I don't really know what's going on. And so we just need to be careful about who we opt into, right? Mentally.
It's such an amazing point. And to be honest with you guys, as you're listening, I really encourage you to challenge and give yourself an audit of who is engaged in your life. Who do you allow and give authority to speak into your lives? Because as Brandon said, I hate this quote, you're the average of the 5 people that you hang around the most with, but it's true, is the more that you spend with these types of people, the more that you spend with different individuals that you are taking in their content or you're working around, these things will consciously or subconsciously start to leach into your way of thinking, into your way of life, into your way of action. And God made each and every one of us unique, made each and every single one of us different, down to our last cell. And if we're not treating ourselves on that level, if we're not treating ourselves as individuals, if we're not treating ourselves differently and owning our different, owning that inner discontent, owning that inner uniqueness that exists, we're going to wind up on a journey that's not ours. And quite frankly, that's not the calling that we were meant to answer, not the door that we were meant to open and walk through powerfully, but rather just kind of take one step through and go, is this it? And so that is the emptiest feeling that we can ever have. And it's something that we can ultimately prevent just by simply doing that one thing that Brandon spoke about, which was being careful of who you give authority to speak into your lives with. And and it can really transform and create revelation on the way we're living day to day. And so, Brandon, as you start to become more focused on that, on who speaks into your life, on who gets engaged in it, do you have a set of parameters? And again, I love how you answered that first question, how everybody's different. So guys and girls listening, ladies, gentlemen, men, women, when you hear what Brandon's purview is or what Brandon's sorting process is, that's not your sorting process. Use that as a launch pad to figure out and help deduce your own process in which you do that. I wanted to preface that before you go. So
yeah. Well, and on that, like, it even goes for business. Like, I was working with a client just earlier today, and it's like, just because you see other people doing it, and no, it really boils down to this: is when we were building Lady Boss, right? $0 to $200 million in revenue. We're making all these decisions about structure and team and hiring and marketing and how we grow our, like, most of the time I didn't really look at competitors, right? Like, I learned from people who were executing, but we just asked the questions to ourselves, use the smartest people that we had around us to come up with the answers. And those are the things we did, right? Like, there's certainly tactics and strategies out there, and you need to be a student, because I've gone a year without doing that, and that was a disaster, right? Like, be a student and learn no matter what. But at the same time, the context of your life, the quotes online don't know about the context of your life.
Yes.
Right. Only you do. And so whether it's a business strategy or principle or personally or whatever, like, you have to run it through that filter, right? It's like a sand filter, like you're pouring, sand into it and sifting it through. It's like, without that context to apply whatever it is. And that's what people don't have. Right. And that's why it's good to have great people closer to you. I think the closer people are to you, the more context they have about what's going on in your life. And I think the less you probably need to filter their feedback, right? And where they're coming from. And I would stack that with, obviously, maybe not so obviously, but listening to people, submitting to authority in your life for people that have results in an area that you wanted in, right? I think that's goes without saying it, but I'm not trying not make those assumptions anymore, because it's like, not everyone's walked through all this stuff that you have, and I get on these things. I'm like, yeah, don't people know this? And you're like, it's the content we're all hearing. But everyone's at a different stage of that.
Yep.
Absolutely.
So true. When Brandon, so after you went through this, you obviously built Lady Boss, leaned into it, had an amazing exit, kind of talk to bringing this full circle now, coming back to that value system and that value prop, and how it allowed you and afforded you the ability to exit the way you did, with who you did, in the opportunities in which came to you by living your value system out in the nth degree, and came back to you in a form of massive abundance.
So on a public forum like this, I have to say this, because one of my values is transparency, right? And I don't want to, that's just core to me. And so with Lady Boss, just an unbelievable journey. A rocket ship 2019, it was, the number 4 fastest growing company in the country, number 1 in B2C. All the companies 1, 2, and 3 were B2B, blah, blah, blah. All of that was mind blowing and frankly, like, pushed the limits of everything that I've ever aspired to do. Had no intention of it going there, and stretched me, in every area to where the other areas of my life were breaking down. Right. Like, I went through that. Like, I was that guy who was like sacrificing all the other things. And came full circle to it, right? I went through that, but ultimately, you say the words amazing exit, and I go, it wasn't what I wanted it to be. And so what had happened in 2021, we launched a process, and I've told this story in a few public forums before, but in 2021, we launched a process to sell the business. My wife and I decided that we were ready to move on to a new season. It was like God wants us to do something new. And it's one of those things where you know it, and we both knew it, but like, we didn't know what was next, which is a crazy proposition. to think about when you've built something for 8 years and you don't know what you're supposed to do next. And especially at the magnitude that we built it, it's like, man, how am I going to one up this? I gotta grow. So like, how am I going to one up that or push that? And so we launched the process to sell. We had incredible bankers and the deck, and just I could go into so many layers of that. But ultimately, there was a once in a decade shift in digital marketing, which was that little window that pops up on your phone and says "Ask app not to track" whenever you open an app. And so as a heavily acquisition based, ultimately commodity, I think for the most part, health supplements and health programs are a commodity at some level. It's such a mature market. And so we were heavily reliant on new acquisition, right? And so in the middle of talking with 70 different buyers, 73, 15 seemed strategic buyers, Jenny Craig, Slim Fast, all the big boys that would want a women's health and weight loss platform like ours. This update, this iOS update bomb blew up basically. And overnight we lost 70% of our customer acquisition. Wow. Right. So what was going to be $75 to $125 million exit, for sure thing, Brandon, the low end is 75. And I was like, man, that would be insane, wouldn't it? And so that basically lit a bomb off, and everyone held their breath and was like, we need to see how you adapt. And then, they were like, hey, let's go back and take it back next year. Right. So it basically was positioned at such a premium multiple. And then you had this once in a decade event at the worst timing of the world. And that's where you have to go, man, this is why you can't have your identity in your business and sell your business, because this is why people in 2008, when the world crashed, commit suicide, because their identity is wrapped in to their success, and it goes away or it changes because there's some things you're not in control of. Timing matters, right? If I would have done the process a year earlier, it would have been just like planned, right? Mm-hmm. And that's where you get humbled in business, right? That's where you get your hair blown back and go, wow, but I had no control over that. And so ultimately we took the business back to market. We had to downscale some things. We had to get lean. I learned so much through the process of having to pivot that and then get lean. And then ultimately we took the business back and sold in the next year, but it wasn't at the level that it should have been or what people probably thought it was. Right. And so that's like the moments that really the change of seasons that test you and how you respond to that. And so I had a crazy like stripping of my identity of that result and like being in that result. And so don't get me wrong, like it was a great number, but it wasn't 75 to $125 million. Right. And that's where, going back to the more money that I've made and the more I've been through this cycle of building and success and entrepreneurship, the more I realize that there's a lot out of your control. There's a lot in your control, but the other facets of life, if you sacrifice them all on the way to a number or something that, and literally this was what's so crazy is that the difference between what happened and like what would have happened if that decade shift in that privacy update hadn't have gone off, and I had that value and that sale amount versus what it was, the difference wouldn't actually, and it doesn't change my lifestyle at all. And that's what's so crazy about it once you get to a certain point. And so when you talk about values, that's what I'm like, man, I'm learning a lot about my own values through the last year and that whole process. So it's been quite a journey.
Yeah. I mean, it certainly sounds like it. And one of the things I find myself thinking as you're talking through that is, as difficult as it probably was when you're in it, looking back on it and the amount of gold you just dropped all over the place from everything that you learned, the perspective that you gained, you wouldn't have had nearly half as much of that had you not gone through what you went through. So although it was physically a really difficult process, it allowed you to grow into who you are. And like you said, become even closer and more identified to your values, but also fully know who your identity is as Brandon, as opposed to Brandon plus the business.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely.
So from somebody who so clearly lives in what we call ownership, and by that, I mean somebody who is rooted in who they are, somebody who believes in something greater than themselves, somebody who has a really strong understanding and lives by what their values are, somebody who understands what their priorities are and puts those into an integrated way in their lifestyle. Brandon, what would you say is your definition of ownership?
I think it's ultimate responsibility.
And why is that?
I think about especially the city I grew up in. I grew up in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and there's an absolute victim spirit in this city. It's like, woe is me, everything's happening to me. I'm here because of other people. And I think when we finally accept ultimate responsibility for where we are and we stop blaming externally, I think we gain all of the power to change it. Because it's really easy to just be like, oh, I have bad genes and that's why I'm overweight. It's like, oh, that's a nice excuse. Like, you really don't think that you could outwork that? Because when we are a victim and we don't own it, as you say, and as I'm saying, when we don't take ultimate responsibility, we automatically give up our power to change it, which gives us an excuse to not do the work.
It's 100% right. I love the component that you added about you truly give up your power, because you do. It's literally handing everything over that you have at your disposal and saying, I don't want to look at this. I don't want to understand it. I don't want to question it. I don't want to take action on it. Somebody else do it. And ultimately, when somebody else is in control, you're not going to get to where you want to be. And it's a really frustrating situation to be in. Brandon?
Yeah. Well, that's why there's like, and frankly, I say this all the time. It's like, there's so much room at the top because everybody wants to take everyone wants to take painkillers and nobody's willing to take vitamins. Right. And so it's like, there's so much room at the top. There's, if you're willing to do what it takes and accept responsibility, it's easy. I mean, like truly, it's simple. I would say the journey there is difficult, but in whatever industry or business or area you're trying to improve, because you're obviously subscribed and opted into improving. You would not be listening to this right now if you weren't. And so you've already conquered probably the most important thing and said, I'm not just going to be a victim. I'm going to learn and grow and I'm going to own it. And so that's why you're here. And so if you've already made that distinction and decision in your head, now it's just about being consistent long enough, right? Because there's great information and people that are coming on here all the time. It's just like, are you doing it consistently or does it just come in these spurts, right? It's like, that's what I think is the biggest thing is I'm working with entrepreneurs now, helping companies that are 7 and 8 figures grow, helping CEOs shortcut the learning curve that I went through over 8 years, helping them go from a couple $1 million or $10 million to that next level. Because I've done that. I've built that journey myself. And what I see all the time is there's so many shiny objects flying by on the highway and they're just not consistent long enough in one area of focus. And we're always just putting our attention here and there and subscribing to so many different things at once and not being consistent. And so half the time it's like, we just need to do more of less things. Like we just need to take more consistent action with less things over time and give ourselves the time for it to flow through. Like I was having a conversation today. I was like, I just feel like it's not happening fast enough. Like, I don't think there's an entrepreneur on here who thinks it's happening fast enough. It's like, it's never
I'll agree with you on that.
Yeah. It's never happening fast enough. It's never happening big enough. And the journey's supposed to be linear and it's just supposed to be this like fairy tale. I'm just like, what if it took you 6 months to get this breakthrough and you stayed where you are now and then you got there in 6 months and you changed the time horizon of expectation? Would you feel as crappy as you do now? Like, how cool would it be if in 6 months you were there? And it's like, we want it next week. And if it doesn't get there next week, then the test failed or it wasn't the right strategy. And then we squirrel to something else because we're just not willing to be consistent long enough. It's like, that's what I see so much of.
So true. It truly is. And it resonates with me because I'm aware of it. And by being aware of it, you can ultimately adjust it and move off of it and not fall victim to it. But you're right. As an entrepreneurial spirit, that's something you're constantly wanting more of, is faster, 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 but being willing to stay in it and stay consistent with it. Like anything, success is not only then possible, it's actually probable. And the likelihood that you're going to attain it is not if, it's just a matter of when. And you got to stay there and stay in it and keep your foot in it if it's something that you truly value and it's something that you truly believe in.
Yeah, it's so good, Justin. And like, we think consistency is 1 week, or even 1 month. It's like, oh, your company grew so fast, 200K, 2 million, 7 million, 30 million. That was the growth year over year. And it was like, well, I did spend 5 years in network marketing in people's living rooms, doing thousands of home parties and tens of thousands of phone calls with people about their health. That's what created the foundation for that company to do what it did. And that's like the part that people don't want to, they don't want to admit that existed or had to have happen. We just want it. We want it now in our.
It took you 8 years to become the overnight success.
That's right.
It's that foundation of work that you put in that allowed you to get there and build that. Brandon, where can people find more of you? Where can people find more of your content? Where can people get access to you if everything that you said today resonated heavily?
Yeah, so I put out tons of free content on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, and YouTube. So just type in Brandon Poulin. I think on Instagram, it's real Brandon Poulin and some variation of that on the other ones. And then Brandon Poulin, POULIN.com. If you're someone who's in that 7 and 8 figure business range and you want to grow and scale and you don't know which direction, you haven't built a leadership team, you're struggling with operating the whole thing, you need to know your numbers better. Like, we need to get a handle on this, so as the stakes get bigger, we can do it and still get sleep at night and not be the one-man band and kill ourselves along the way. If any of that resonates with you and you're in that category, that's where you can apply to work with me. So it's been awesome talking to you guys today. So that's why I'm always telling my family, I'm like, yeah, Justin's my coach. I got a health coach. I'm like, dude was working with NHL professional athletes. I was like, I'm not even close to that caliber. So hopefully some of that rubs off and I can like freaking look as good as he does.
I love it. Guys, I'm truly supportive here of Brandon. And you know that the people that we bring on this show, transparency is something that we lean in on. And Brandon has been an incredible wealth of knowledge for us and somebody that we're looking and leaning into as well. And so I really encourage you to go to brandonpoulin.com. We will put all of his links, all of his social media in the show notes. So be sure to reach out to him. Be sure to use him as a resource. Be sure to lean on him because, again, as we started at the beginning, not only is he a great business person, but he's a great man, a great father, and a believer. And the way in which his values align is something that can benefit you guys at the long run as well. So listeners, as you go forward, remember that sacrifice and putting it all at the altar of success is not the definition of success. It will leave you in that state of what we call ultimate failure, which is success without fulfillment, that deep, empty hole that will continue to be there no matter what direction you look at. And as you go through that journey and as you look at where you need to navigate yourself, be sure that you are careful of who you give authority to speak into your life. Because at the end of the day, the quotes online don't allow you to know the context of your life. They don't understand what's going on. Chapter 1 of your book does not look like chapter 15 of somebody else's, and vice versa. You have to make sure that you are living in your season, living in the stage that you're in, leaning into the cycle that you're experiencing. And at the end of the day, making sure that you're running your own race, because there are roads to nowhere and nobody wants to be on those. We all want to be on a train that's being pulled in the right direction. And it only happens when you know what your values are. Only happen when you're clear on those. Just like with Brandon, knowing exactly where he wants to go, coming back to, and I'm going to come back to this, knowing the name of his first client, Yolanda. If you're listening, congratulations. You're on this man's heart for the rest of his life because he knows where his values are. He knows what's happening and he knows the direction he's going. Success is different. So own your different, and we'll see you next week.